Hi, folks. Welcome to Walking on the Weene Side, part of It Matters Radio. And tonight I am joined by Joseph Farley, and he is the author of this book right here. It's called Labor Day, and it is published by Peasantry Press. And I found it kind of interesting, so I thought it would be good to talk with him. Joseph, I have to tell you, this is a very bleak, dystopic kind of book.
Well, I take that as a compliment.
You should.
It's a novel, and everyone has to remember it's a novel, but it is science fiction, and so that's you extrapolate from the present, but you also exaggerate in order to, and there's a story involved. So bleak is as bleak becomes. I mean, Dickens was bleak, but it was also entertaining.
Mm-hmm. Like I said, it's good enough, so I wanted you on. It's just, but it is bleak and fascinating because you extrapolate a few very interesting topics, and I wanted to explore those because we don't want to do too many spoilers. We want people to read the book, which they can buy most easily, I guess, either from your publisher or on Amazon.
It's available at barnesandnoble.com for the hard copy, the hardback and the paperback. The ebook version is available at amazon.com and several other vending sources for ebooks.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that you really, you got me with cockroaches. So let's talk about cockroaches.
Well, they're not necessarily the friendliest beasts. I wouldn't necessarily want to raise them for fun, but I have had them as neighbors and housemates for much of my life. So cockroaches. The book has a quote from Kafka, the Metamorphosis, and that is important to understand. It's cockroaches. What is a cockroach? A cockroach is an insect, but insects are survivors, and cockroaches are real survivors. I was reading an article on the internet just the other day about how indestructible cockroaches are. So they're going to be around a while.
But they're not just roaches. In your book, cockroaches refer not to insects, but to a hybrid.
Yeah, the conceptually, gene splicing, gene therapy, and people who want to survive disasters or terrible things will try to look out for what will give them an edge in say, when there's radiation or other calamities. Mm-hmm. And in this particular novel, we have individuals who are descendants of individuals who went through some kind of gene therapy or to gain certain benefits, of survival benefits.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things I thought was very interesting was you could also use it as a metaphor because in this book, what we usually think of as racial differences in modern America aren't mentioned really in the book. Rather, it's people who have this kind of genetic background of having some kind of gene splicing. And it isn't just cockroaches, there's also some scorpions, as I recall.
Yes, well, yeah. I see a future where there's going to be a lot more people of mixed race. I think that's the trend, and I think that's where you're going to have the majority going to be of some kind of mixed race, but you're always going to have differences within any society, wherever it is. So if you take race out of the picture or diminish it as a obvious contender for problems, between groups, you're left with some other ways of hating each other.
Well, in a very real sense, actually, the racial difference between the bug genetic people and those who are not is much more real, because it really is a meaningful genetic difference. So you have created races here in the book that really have differences, and very interesting differences. One of the things I wanted to just mention is the protagonist of the book works in a furniture store and mostly catering to wealthy members of the cockroach background, and they have rather an interesting living preference, which I thought you did something very humorous. I wanted you to share that. What was their
Well, I just I can remember when someone was moving, and for some reason they had to tear down part of a wall, and there was inside the wall it was packed with cockroaches. They are not, they're not loners. They tend to live in communities.
in dark places.
Excuse me?
Dark communities. They tend to prefer to live away from the light.
Live away from the light, and in this particular situation, the wall, there was albino cockroaches underneath that wall, but a whole, colossal number of them. So there's the furniture is designed not just to sleep upon, but sleep inside and pile up on, and the way that cockroaches will. I mean, if you've ever had cockroaches in your sofa.
Well, I've been fortunate in avoiding that, but I think you captured it very nicely. So you see, folks, there's some entertaining quality to this. It's not all just bleak. Now, one of the things is that you really look at very, very strongly is the Big Brother aspect that we see potentially coming about in our society.
I think that is very easy to do. I mean, in 1984, you had a television that watched you, and we're on Skype.
Right.
So how's the difference there? I mean, and a hacker can hack it. There's all kinds of stories about hackers hacking into computers and turning on the cameras. So being watched, that's one thing. But you also have drones everywhere now, and you have cameras everywhere now. Everyone has a security camera. It's just the police can go pull security footage from a number of homes and businesses if a serious crime occurs.
Oh, absolutely. And of course, they can trace what you're doing online. They can trace. One of the things that drives me crazy is I'll look at an ad for something, or I'll go to a website online, and the next thing I know, I'm inundated with ads from that. It drives me up a wall. But yeah, the Big Brother is watching, and in many forms. One of the major forms, of course, for Big Brother to be watching us is, in fact, through our involvement in the social media.
Data mining is big business. It helps your advertising and marketing. Mm-hmm. And Cambridge Analytics showed it can also be used for political purposes. Yeah.
Now, one of the things that you do very nicely in Labor Day, your book, is that you show the desperation of people trying to communicate below the radar. They're trying to get their message across to the world around them, but without being watched, because they fear that the government is going to go after them. And that's a little, I don't want to do a spoiler alert here, folks, but obviously you have to have good guys and bad guys to make a novel work.
Well, good. There's always good guys and bad guys, but there's always it's like the yin and the yang. You have a little bit of the opposite, and the and one or the other. So communication today. If you don't want to be watched, you can be paranoid about it. You can be passing little scribbled notes to each other. You can develop your little secret sign language, and hopefully it's not caught on camera and decoded. There's different ways of doing things, and I think most people aren't going to worry about anyone worrying about their lives. And I think the bored individuals who have to surf through, weed through all the footage and all the messages will be very bored with most people's lives. But if you're doing something that might cause any concern to anyone, you have more reason to be careful about how you communicate.
Yeah, well, there are red flags, obviously, in our society now, and presumably in this future society, because one of the problems in the future society that you are talking about in Labor Day is income inequality.
Could you repeat that, please? That last line.
Income inequality.
Income inequality.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So income inequality.
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 The fact that there are a few rich people and a lot of very, very poor people in this world.
Well, that is if you historically you generally had a large peasantry and a very small middle class, mm-hmm. and a much smaller top of the pyramid, the wealthy ruling class. Whether you're talking about the 50 noble families of England, or if you're talking about any kind of pre-democratic society, one of the things about the United States is we had small farmers and we had small business people, and the gulf in wealth has grown and shrank, but certainly in the last 20 years has been a widening gulf. You could trace it back possibly longer than that in this country, but it's not just this country. It's something that happens everywhere, where you're going to have a small group that have most of the land, or most of the coins, most of the business interests, and the majority are going to be somewhere lower on the scale.
We're going to have to take a break, but we'll be right back with Joseph Farley to talk more about Labor Day.
Memoirs from the Asylum by Kenneth Weene, a novel of emotion, madness, life, and the search for freedom. The nurse with the black hair and the bloodshot eyes had propped Marilyn up that morning. She'd coaxed a few spoons of oatmeal or cream of wheat or whatever down her throat. Marilyn likes to watch the black-haired nurse with the bloodshot eyes feed her. She's so dexterous with the napkin. The drools and dribbles are wiped away before they can stain her bedclothes. It isn't easy being a schizophrenic. It takes effort to stay hidden. If she makes a mistake, even a little one, she will be found out. See how careful the mouse is to stay still? He hopes the cat won't see him hiding there, but if she sees him, he'll jump back inside the hole where she can't follow him. But the cat did catch the mouse. She'd seen her eating him, throwing him up and down in the air like a little ball until, tired with her game, she snapped his body apart. The mouse should never have come out of his hole, Marilyn thinks. He should have stayed in there, except when it was rainy or snowy or cloudy or night, or not sunny anyway. That is the best thing of all. It always is. She wonders if she could make a sign warning cats to stay away. Can cats read? That is a question worth pondering. Some of us land in the morgue. Some of us land in the asylum. And some of us build our own asylums. It's all the same. It is, in the end, all the same. Memoirs from the Asylum is available in print and Kindle from Amazon.com.
Welcome back to Walking on the Weene Side. Joseph, we were talking about income inequality and the historical trends. And of course, one of the fascinating things about income, and if you look at the physical anthropological data, what you see is that it is reflected in people's diets. And when it gets too divided, as it did, for example, in late 19th century, was it 18th century, I'm sorry, France, late 18th century France, and people are yelling, we want bread, and of course the, not true story, but the apocryphal story of Marie Antoinette said, well, let them eat cake. But that sense that people's diets change as incomes go down, and that one of the things that has marked the American growth of the American middle class has been the upscaling of diet, and particularly greater eating of meat. And you do a wonderful riff on that. So would you like to talk about meat in your book, Labor Day?
Well, as population increases, growing meat's going to be more expensive. Meat is going to be an expensive commodity. So it takes a certain amount of land to raise the grain to feed an animal. I think most of the corn grown in the United States goes to animal feed. If that was, although I think we use that same corn for tortilla chips, so it's not like we don't eat it. Most of it goes to animal feed. If you have a high population, meat's going to become scarce, in theory. That's one of the vegan arguments. It's an ecological argument that's been going on for years. So I envision in the novel a future where there's high population, wide gulf between the wealthy and the not so wealthy and the poor, and there going to be a hard time getting meat in the way we think of meat today. There'll be protein sources. There's plenty of protein sources out there other than bovines and chickens and pigs. There's other protein sources, and so where are the poor going to get their protein? They're going to get it somewhere, and they won't be able to get the steaks and the pork chops and the things we as Americans we've come to appreciate. Sure, down on the farm you could get that, and when we had industrialization, it became harder for the average person, but refrigeration and railroads made that a lot easier to get to everyone's table.
Well, so you have the beginning of this novel actually starts in a restaurant. It's kind of a restaurant that's fallen on hard times, but your hero is in the restaurant, and he's ordering his very self-indulgent, something he can't afford, but he's ordering himself a meat meal. Now, we won't tell people what the meal is because I want them to read the book. But your notion of meat certainly upset me. I got to admit, if I had my druthers and it wouldn't gross out all our people watching our show, I'd be sitting here with a pork chop or a lamb chop or something, gnawing on it. I'm a real carnivore.
Right. Well, I think most people are carnivores, or I think we're all omnivores, but I think some are more carnivores than others. But if you think of a city under siege or history, even in the Bible, they'll talk about when people are under siege and what they eat to survive. And you have a survival situation, but also that certain things are going to be a luxury. So if you can't buy the name brand, you buy the knockoff. So the same thing would be with meat. If you want to have that taste of luxury and you can't afford the real deal, you're going to get something as close to that as you can. But what you settle for may not be what we would consider appetizing today.
Of course, you didn't go the Jonathan Swift route, and you're not proposing that people eat their children. So,
no, enough of that's been put out there. I'm not proposing that. But I think there are a lot of other things that multiply quickly that we can eat.
Yeah, and so there's this theme of poverty, and it's played out very powerfully. And then there are some people, who are just so busy surviving, desperate. And then there are some, including eventually the protagonist of the book, who has awakened within him a growing realization that other people matter to him and that something has to change. And, of course, underlying this whole thing, and I think you give it away, you kind of telegraph it in the title, Labor Day, that under the other side of this kind of caricature of a dystopian capitalist system, just as in the 19th century in America, there appeared unions, labor unions, to offset what was going on and to make it possible for people to live. And this is ultimately a book about the rise of the labor movement. And I was wondering if perhaps when you wrote it, you were thinking, I don't know what your own personal background is, but it kind of was very reminiscent to me of what happened in Poland.
Well, solidarities, it has some of that in there about what you do with labor when labor is, but solidarity also had a lot to do with nationalism. So there is some of that, but I think I'm in some ways singing a song of loss for the labor union movement in this country, which is not what it was once.
Yeah.
And also, I think laws were enacted through political pressure brought by unions that have made working better for most people in this country. And it's unlikely we would think that those laws would change, but you never know. There's all kinds of strange pronouncements come out during the political cycles, and you really can't take anything for granted. So conditions, if people are stepped on enough, they're going to try to push back. If they're too weak to push back, they can't. But eventually they don't care anymore and they're going to push back anyway.
Well, we certainly hope that at some point the people will push back against some of these things if they do occur. Because, that kind of grinding poverty, that kind of lack of privacy, that kind of terrible working conditions. And I think one of the things you point out in this book is it's far enough in the future that as people are talking about things like a 40-hour week and stuff. It's something they forgot. A historian actually has to remind them. Yeah, once upon a time, there was a land, not quite Camelot, but at least a land in which there was decent labor laws. I think, Joseph Farley, I think that Labor Day is a book that people perhaps should read less as a work of literature, although they certainly could do that, but more as kind of an adjunct to studying social science. I think you've raised a lot of good issues about how society functions and how it should function and directions it's going in. And I wonder, did you intend that?
Well, I think not everyone's going to read history. It's, say boring. And not everyone's going to read sociology to say boring. But they'll watch a television show, they'll go to a movie, and they might even read a book. More likely to watch TV or watch a movie. So if you have some information in there, they may pick it up. There's nothing wrong with as a writer doing that, and I know some writers like Emerson have argued that you have to do that, but you have to. For this particular book, I thought there was a need to remind people what they may have gone over briefly in high school in one class, and they may or may not have been paying attention, but it's important, and to remember that people died in. If you go up to, I think it's Ludlow in Colorado, where they have the Miners Museum, that's not too far from you. There was a bit of a massacre up there, and a big massacre. And there's been other, when they were striking, and there's been other problems like that in our country, but don't just look at our country. You have to look at other countries and see our labor movement's been very successful. I mean, so successful that it's you could argue that that's why it's fading away. But you can look at labor conditions in some other countries and say, well, wow, yes, that's really like a window back in time to the way our people were working and living maybe 150 years ago. So there's you have to always remind people of the past. And you have, I don't like when we repeat. If you're going to be forced to repeat history if you don't know history, and but even if you know history, it doesn't necessarily mean you can avoid things happening. You just might just be able to more angry about it.
That very interesting observation, that knowing history might just make us more angry as we watch what's going on. I want to thank Joseph Farley, author of Labor Day, from Peasantry Press, for being on the show with me today. Joseph, thank you so much for walking on the Weene side.
Thank you, Kenneth, for having me on here.
Well, I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he. In Salt Lake, Joe, by God, says I, him standing by my bed. They framed you on a murder charge, says Joe, but I ain't dead. says Joe, but I ain't dead. More voice. The copper bosses shot you, Joe. They killed you, Joe, says I. Takes more than guns to kill a man, says Joe, I didn't die. Says Joe, I didn't die. Standing there, as big as life, smiling with his eyes. Joe says what they forgot to kill went on to organize. Went on to organize. Joe Hill ain't dead, he says to me. Joe Hill ain't ever died. Well, working men go out on strike. Joe Hill is at this side. Joe Hill is at this side. From San Diego up to Maine, in every mine and mill, where working men go out on strike, says he, you'll find Joe Hill. Says he, you'll find Joe Hill. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he.
You stopped instead, I caught your smile. I'm just no good, no good. It's too late to dream of home.
My coffee queen, where have you been?
All of the things we said. Where does the time all go?
I'm gonna do you guys a little John party, so if you like it, please give it a like, share, subscribe.